European Union.
Dr. Liam Fox.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I warmly welcome the Chancellor's statement today as a move back towards some sound Conservative principles that have been lacking somewhat in recent years. And I would like the language to have been even more explicit today, because the number one principle that actually did underpin what the Chancellor was saying, perhaps if not expressed so explicitly, was that there is no such thing as public money. There is no such thing as government money. There is only taxpayers' money, whether those taxpayers are personal taxpayers or they are business taxpayers. And we are beginning to get away from the sterile tax and spend debate that's bedevilled our country, and I would argue our party, for too long, and get back onto the territory of how to create wealth. And it was quite right of the Chancellor to remind us of Nigel Lawson's maxim that borrowing is just deferred taxation onto the next generation. No one would think it was reasonable behaviour to max out on your credit card and then give the bills to your offspring. But that is exactly what overspending and overborrowing leads to, and it's exactly the same recipe that the party opposite are putting to the British public all over again. So, like the Shadow Minister, I very much look forward to a general election where we're able to expose the fact that the Labour Party can't even tell us, as a matter of fact, as a matter of their credibility, what proportion of current inflation they think was due, for example, to the commodity price shock as a result of the invasion of Ukraine. They absolutely refuse to accept that there is any responsibility for inflation other than UK domestic pressures and domestic policy. If they believe that that gives them credibility, in the market, then they have got another thing coming. And we will want to make sure that the electorate understand that analysis very well. Now, as we move forward, I guess if the Honourable Lady will answer that specific question on behalf of our front bench, which they won't do, I'll happily give way.
He asks about what questions will be asked during a general election. Could he explain to my constituent, who since last year has had to move back with her husband and children into her parents' home because she cannot afford a mortgage, because when she went to do it again, the Honourable Member for Norfolk had crashed the economy, and therefore she and a lot of other people who live in Crouch End and Muswell Hill cannot afford their mortgages because this government crashed the economy. Could he tell them in a general election what they will say to my constituents?
Unsurprisingly, the Honourable Lady was both incapable and unwilling to actually answer the question, which was, what was the cause of inflation? And it was inflation that drove up interest rates. And I reiterate the point that my honourable friend made: the Fed rate's 5.5%, the Bank of England rate's 5.25%. I presume that the Honourable Lady thinks that the Honourable Member for Norfolk crashed the American economy, in her words too. Is he complete nonsense? Is he bogus economic analysis? We all know the impact that inflation has. We know that inflation hits the poorest people in our society the hardest, which is why the government, along with the Bank of England, were willing to see the pain of higher interest rates actually applied. It doesn't help anyone. But what I wanted to know, which I didn't get from the Honourable Lady, surprise, surprise, and we didn't get from the front bench, surprise, surprise, was what was the external responsibility for that inflation. And we don't have an answer from them, and therefore we have an opposition that has no credibility on one of the most basic questions, which is what causes inflation. And if they don't know the answer to it, they cannot possibly be put and trusted to be put in charge of this country's finances. Now, one of the other things that I welcome today is that we are moving slowly, I would argue still a little too slowly, towards a lower tax economy. But the Chancellor set out the reasons why a lower tax economy was a good thing. It's not just an abstract economic argument. It fits with our ideas, Conservative ideas, of individual responsibility, of reducing the size of government, giving individuals greater choice, and providing incentives for those who will generate the wealth upon which our future public services will depend. And by emphasising the importance of creating prosperity, rather than that sterile debate about should we spend less or tax more, we're getting back into the right territory for a Conservative government. And I was especially pleased to hear the measures for small businesses. My right honourable friend had to endure my last speech on the subject very recently,
when I was pointing out that, unlike what you would believe if you listened to the party opposite, the public sector jobs and private sector jobs are not in balance in our economy. The public sector only produces about 17% of the jobs in our economy. It is the small businesses and the private sector that produce the jobs and prosperity upon which our country depends. And we have had too high a tax burden on the small businesses as they've come out of pandemic. So therefore today I welcome the measures that we have had. I still have trouble with this term growth that goes around, because I don't believe that growth is actually, as measured by the standard definitions appropriate for the UK economy, being so highly geared towards services compared to goods. I know that that's what we have as the accepted norm, but I think that we need to find better ways of describing that. I also welcome today some moves towards improving capital availability, because if our businesses do face one real problem, it's the lack of capital available for growth in our economy compared, for example, to the United States. And that's because our economy is still too heavily geared towards the banks and not enough towards private equity. And we need to find the breadth and depth of that private equity venture capital industry in the United States and find how we can replicate that in the United Kingdom if we are to give even more help to our small businesses going forward. Now, I also very much welcome the incentives to work that the Chancellor announced today. Getting people, again, back into work is not just an economic exercise, but I would regard it as a moral imperative. If the only value that people know they have is what the state gives them to do nothing, how can they possibly know what value they could be to themselves, their families and their communities if they were allowed to realise their full potential? Getting 200,000 more people back into work is a socially progressive thing to do. And if we're able to get more disabled people back into the workplace, so much better for them and not just for the economy. So I welcome what the government has announced today, because the best way to tackle poverty is to get people into work. And it's not just financial poverty, it's poverty of aspiration and poverty of hope that we are addressing by making what is an important social change. Now, there were one or two other elements that I would like to have got some more detail from the Chancellor, and I hope that my right honourable friend in answering the debate might be able to do this, because one of the problems right across the economy, particularly for small business, as the Chancellor stated, is late payment. But one of the most important culprits in late payment is local government. And local government are spending the taxes that we in this House have to raise, in addition to the taxes they raise themselves. Surely it is not acceptable to us that the taxes that we raise are spent in a way that actually adds an extra burden to small businesses. It should be a requirement on local authorities that they pay all their bills to small businesses on time. And I hope the government will look at that as we go ahead, because I believe there would be widespread support across this House for measures that compelled local government to do that. I welcome very much the additional $20 billion investment over the next decade. That will help to improve the one problem that has bedevilled our economy, which is productivity falling behind our competitors, more than I think any other factor. I think improving the horizon for free ports to 10 years will give additional stability, but again, I hope we can look at how we can have a deregulatory exercise in these areas, which can test out exactly how much we could get were we to expand the concept of free ports more. I hope we can look more at the experience of countries like the United States, where the free ports have greater freedoms than they have already in the United Kingdom. The government is moving in exactly the right direction. Let's move further and let's move faster on that. The Chancellor talked about other supply-side reforms to the economy, one of them being the speeding up of the grid, improvements to the grid so we can take advantage of the investments that have been made, for example, in renewables. I would like just to, I don't expect an answer at the wind-ups to this debate today, but I had a private member's bill exactly for the reason that we were seeing a speeding up of improvements to the grid to ensure that individuals who were impacted by that speeding up would have access to an independent arbitration programme so that it was not National Grid who would decide whether they should get compensation and how much they should get. That was an unacceptable position. We've not yet seen the regulations that will produce that independent arbitration, and we need to see it quickly, because if we're going to see the rollout of an improved grid, it will impact more people, and we've got to see a fair and equitable and affordable system where individuals can seek redress if they feel they have been fairly dealt with. And then, of course, I'll just briefly mention the continuing whinging victimhood of the nationalists, because when they were talking about the ridiculous position that they're put in by being part of the union, they just forgot to mention, I'm sure it was an omission, that the block grant has now risen to the high since devolution began, at £41 billion this year, and that for every £100 that the United Kingdom government spends in England, the Scottish Government receives £126 per person in Scotland. The Honourable Gentleman gave his side of the case. I'm just pointing at the fact that they have actually done extremely well, and that individuals in Scotland do very well at their membership of the Union. And I think if they want to see crash, they know exactly which way to go about it, though I fear the electors of Scotland at the general election will ensure that they don't really get the opportunity to test their mad theories to destruction. I was glad, Madam Deputy Speaker, that we had a Conservative financial statement today, which I think sets course for the spring budget and the chance to set out genuine differences of ideology when we get to a general election. That we believe that we should have a smaller state, we believe in lower taxes, we believe in public sector reform, and we believe in getting better value for money for the taxpayer. The Labour Party will want to increase spending, increase borrowing, and pass it on to the next generation. And as with all things, the primal difference between Socialists and Conservatives is that we believe in equality of opportunity. They believe in equality of outcome, equal mediocrity for all, when what we want to see is the betterment of the United Kingdom for the sake of all its people.
Sir Stephen Timms.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker.